Hello, everyone. Dr. Michael Kerper here. Excuse me, let me remove that real quick. Um, Hello, how are you? I hope things are going well. Uh, we just had our 4th of July celebration here in America, as you may know. So I had a pretty good weekend. I hope you did too. And we are now ready for Book 3 in Plato's Republic. I'm going to try and do everything in a single video here, okay? So just to let you know, I'm going to try and do all of Book 3 in one video at this point. We got to wrap up the course here fairly quickly here. I know we got behind, but let's go ahead and finish what we've got here and all that. So Book 3 is something of an extension of Book 2, okay? As you know, if you remember in Book 2, we talked about the need for supervising the storytellers in our city. And the reason why Socrates is bringing that up is he's trying to respond to Adimantus's concerns about justice at the beginning of Book 2, remember? When Adimantus talked about the stories told about justice. Well, the first kind of stories that Socrates talked about is the stories regarding the gods. And we can't just tell any old story about the gods. We have to represent the gods in a particular way if we want people to be just. If people believe the gods themselves are unjust, or if the gods abide by a different set of rules, or can do whatever they feel like, then how can we expect human beings to be just? How can we expect our rulers in our city, known as the guardians, how can we expect them to be just, right? So, all right. Well, Book 3 starts with how we are going to depict in our stories the afterlife. Heaven and hell, or in the book it's called Hades, right? Hades. And Hades was the name the Greeks gave to the domain of the afterlife. And how is it depicted according to the opening pages of Book 3? It seems like it's depicted as a pretty fearful, dreary kind of place. Does Socrates think that's very good? No, he does not, right? He thinks this is not going to instill courage in our guardians, and they're going to need courage. It's not going to instill courage in the people, right? And so what will happen if we represent in our stories the afterlife in too negative a way, what's going to happen is people will fear death too much to the point where they will choose to be slaves rather than to die. And so we don't want guardians who fear death more than slavery, according to Socrates. What we really want our guardians to fear slavery more than death, right? If they are going to be courageous leaders. And so that means we're going to have to represent, in our stories, we're going to have to represent the afterlife in a much better way. Okay? And um, Socrates also talks about in the opening pages, he talks about a lot of different kinds of stories, right? Um, he talks about, here maybe I can erase these and use this again. Um, one way he breaks down stories is by talking about tragedy and comedy. I hope you know these words in English. Um, Tragedy or tragic stories, right, are stories that are very serious in nature, and they deal with um, heroes or human beings, right, who are forced to suffer some terrible calamity of some kind, right? Um, and often it's depicted as something that is fateful. It's a fate, Fate, right? Um, so tragic fate, right? Well, if you remember, Adimantus was concerned about this, right? The gods giving bad fates to good people and good fates to bad people, right? Um, we all know of stories like that. Of course, we know some real life stories that are like that. But Socrates is trying to uh, alert us to the fact that we don't want our guardians indulging in tragedy all the time. It's going to make them depressed. It's going to uh, undermine their faith in justice. And again, people won't want to be just if they think that life is filled with tragedy, right? And so, and likewise, comedy. We don't want too much comedy in our city as well, right? Why is that? Do we want our guardians to be laughing all the time? Um, what is a problem with comedy? Especially if you indulge in it too much. What's a possible problem with comedy, do you think? Well, comedy often gets us uh, uh, to take trivial matters, right, and focus too much on trivial matters. Oftentimes, comedy is about trivial matters, right? Or we take serious matters that are supposed to be taken seriously. We take them as not so serious. Um, will our guardians be good guardians if they indulge in too much comedy? Socrates does not seem to think so, does he? He warns against excessive laughter. We don't want our guardians to be laughing all the time, right? Um, and so that's another kind of story that is talked about. Um, Stories about heroes. This is an important topic, isn't it? Because all too often, even who we choose to be our heroes says a lot about the way we think and feel about justice, right? Um, who is, well, let's start with our own culture first, actually. And I know you're in a different culture, you're in a different country, but it's an important question. Who's held up as a hero in your culture? And why are they seen as a hero? Over here in America, we have, when we go to the movies, as you may know, we go watch movies about totally fictional people uh, who are superheroes of some kind, Superman or the X-Men or the Marvel Comics heroes, right? And how are they represented? Socrates thinks this is a very important point to look at. He's very concerned, as you can tell, about culture. Culture. In a lot of ways, Plato, who's the author here, I think Plato thinks that culture shapes politics more than politics shapes culture. I hope that makes some sense. That's what Socrates is responding to here. That's what he's concerned about. Um, all too often, politics really is simply an extension of and a response to culture, and it often responds to culture when it's too late. We'll come back to that later. That last point. But that's why we're talking about this. Socrates is deeply concerned about the culture. Culture has everything to do with how just a people is. Any people. Okay? Well, who's the great hero in ancient Greece? Maybe you know this. It's Achilles, right? Achilles. He's the great hero from Homer's stories, right? The Iliad. How is Achilles represented? Is he a good hero? Is he going to instill justice in our guardians as a model to follow and imitate? I don't think so, right? Why not? Well, look at the things Socrates talks about. Achilles is rebellious. He dishonors the gods. He dishonors his king. He's arrogant. He gets insanely angry to the point where after he kills Hector, the guy he fights on the other side, Achilles is a Greek, Hector is a Trojan. After he slays Hector, he drags him around behind his chariot for days, screaming insults at the Trojans. He seems to be fond of money. He seems to think that he should receive constant praise and constant reward. He's defiant towards the gods. Is any of this a good example for our young guardians? No. No, not at all, right? So we're going to have to find different heroes. Who would that be? Socrates? What do you think? So we've talked about the gods, the afterlife, heroes, tragedy, comedy. Starting on page 73, Socrates talks about stories just told about human beings. And the important thing there seems to be how human beings respond to suffering, injustice, and things of that sort, right? And we don't want human beings to be represented as being excessively sad or excessively angry about things that they suffer, right? And so this all comes together as a single set of concerns, right? We want to represent heroes and human beings and gods who are truly good, who pursue the good, who do and cause good things, right? And do not give in to slavery or other bad moral qualities, who do not exhibit those kinds of things. We want heroes. We want to tell stories about heroes who are just, who are actually just, right? So, all right. Well, at the bottom of page 73, the topic changes. The topic changes from the content of the stories to the form or style of the stories. So content deals with what a story says, what it's about, right? The plot. The form or style is how you tell the story. The story says and how you tell it, right? Or as Socrates says at the bottom of 73, what they should say and how they should say it, okay? So this is also important, right? So Socrates, the next few pages, talks about the differences between narration and direct speech. If I'm doing a play, I have characters on a stage directly speaking, right? But if I'm writing a novel, I'm going to narrate a lot, right? Narration describes the action of the story, whereas direct speech gives us the direct speech of the story, right? The actual things that the characters are saying, and it's coming directly from those characters. Well, Socrates is implying that that difference in style has a difference in effect. There's a difference in effect. Just as there's a difference in effect between tragedy and comedy, for example, right? Where if I'm constantly reading and watching tragedies, I'm not going to think that life is very hopeful. And I may not try to be as just as I should be. On the other hand, comedy has a very different and opposite effect, right? Whereas tragedy tends towards being too serious, comedy tends towards not being serious enough, right? Especially about matters that are indeed serious, like justice. So, and of course, uh, this is part of the discussion of tragedy and comedy. We've talked about that already, right? But um, at the bottom of page 76, I did want to point out that Socrates defines what the guardian's craft is. They are the most exact craftsmen of the city's freedom. So write that down. That's the definition of the guardian craft. Okay? So we want to avoid telling stories that depict heroes doing shameful things or bad things or exhibiting vices, bad moral traits. We don't want extreme tragedies or extreme comedies or too much of either one of those, right? Um, Socrates talks about imitating non-human sorts of things, animals, sounds, the wind, storms. I think he's just getting at people who try and depict these things, giving impressions of these things. He thinks this is beneath the dignity of being human, right? So, um, but Socrates is also, so now that we're talking about form and style, Socrates wants to talk about different kinds of music, Now, if you remember in book 2, when we first started talking about the guardian's education, that's what we're really dealing with here. How are we going to educate our guardians, right? When we first started talking about that, Socrates divided the guardian education into 2 parts, musical and physical, right? Musical and physical. Musical training deals with that part of the training of the guardians that deals with stories, deals with poetry, telling a story through poetry or through music, because that's often how stories were told back then. And so this is why he's concerned with the sound and style of the music. It's rhythm. Uh, we'll get to physical education in just a minute. But musical education is the philosophical part of the guardian's education. This is what gives them the ideas and the beliefs that they will need in order to be good guardians. Because there are ideas in stories, as we're coming to find out, I think, right? A tragedy that depicts Zeus being cruel to someone who is just and good in the form of a tragic fate, there's a philosophical implication there, isn't there? That the gods don't care about justice, or that they themselves might be unjust, or something like that. And it forces the question, why be just in an unjust world? Right? So, that's why we're dealing with this. So let's go to this. Let's talk about musical genre, different kinds of music. Do they have different effects? What do you think? What kinds of music do you listen to? Let's just sort of make a list here. I don't need to write these on the board, but let's make a list of different kinds of music. There's rock and roll, folk music, right? Country music, you probably know a lot of this, I think. A lot of this comes from America and the West, right? Um, there's classical music. There's different kinds of ethnic music. You probably have traditional Chinese music that you still hear from time to time, right? A lot of different kinds of music. Heavy metal, rap. So here's the question. What kind of music do we want to raise our guardians on? We're educating them. We're trying to educate them to become just. What kind of music? Should they be listening to lots of rap, for example? Or lots of heavy metal? What would be the appropriate kind of music for them? Remember, we don't want leaders who are luxurious. Remember that from book 2? We live in a luxurious city, but we need to get it to act in a better way. We need it to become more just because it is currently unjust. It's too much pursuing luxury and desire, right? So, do we want our guardians to be listening to lots of rap? And again, what kinds of things does rap say, and how does it say it? What are the messages, and how are the messages communicated? What do you think? And heavy metal or any other different kinds of music? What about really soft kinds of pop music? Do we want our guardians to listen to lots of pop music? You probably have a lot of pop music there in China. I don't know. Or maybe you listen to American and European pop music. Socrates' point is that different kinds of music have different effects on the soul, right? Because look at the bottom of 84. Musical training is most important, first, because rhythm and harmony permeate the innermost element of the soul and affect it more powerfully than anything else, and bring it grace if one's education makes one graceful, right? Or the opposite if one is not. We want our guardians to be graceful. How many kinds of music will actually help with that? And how many kinds of music will hurt that goal? Right? Music deeply affects us, Socrates is arguing. It deeply affects us. Are we going to let our guardians just listen to whatever they want, our young guardians? The answer is no. Right? And I think what Socrates is arguing here is the kinds of stories we take in, the kinds of music we listen to, the kind of culture we are exposed to, that is what our souls feed on, like food, like nourishment. And either we truly nourish the soul so that it becomes healthy and good and just, or we feed it junk food, Doritos and soda, right? And it becomes a bad soul. It becomes disorderly and that sort of thing. So, that's what Socrates is getting at here. There are many kinds of music that will harm our guardians if we let them listen to that kind of music or develop a taste for that kind of music. Yeah. And so, um, give me one moment here. So, we want to avoid excessive pleasure, excessive desire, right? We don't want our guardians to be excessive in anything, right? So, uh, that's why we are talking about all these things that are part of the culture, right? We don't want our guardians to be too soft and easygoing, and we don't want them to be too harsh or hard and potentially cruel, right? They have to be tough, fair, and yet gentle as well, right? And very self-disciplined. So, um, starting on page 86 and 87, Socrates then shifts to talking about physical training, the other part of the guardian's education. Physical education. What kind of education do we want our guardians to have? We want them to have, do we want them to be like athletes? And what does Socrates say to that? He says no, right? Yeah, I hope you caught that. I hope you can, yeah. There's still room here. I'm going to erase this. But so we don't want, when it comes to physical training, physical education, the two choices seem to be athletic training and some other kind that we haven't named yet. But look what he says about athletic training. In the middle of page 87. Haven't you noticed that these athletes sleep their lives away, and that if they deviate even a little from their orderly regimen, they become seriously and violently ill? Right? It seems like their kind of training is a soporific. That means something that induces or causes sleep or drowsiness or laziness. I think here's what he's getting at. If you look at athletes, yes, they train hard, but once they're done with training, they're done. And the rest of the day, they're relaxing, right? Playing video games, watching TV, right? Whereas we want a different kind of physical training, right? Look at the next paragraph on 87. We need a more refined sort of training for our warrior athletes, since they must be like sleepless hounds, as it were, who have the keenest possible sight and hearing, and whose health is not so precarious that it cannot sustain the frequent changes of water and food generally, and the heat waves and winter storms typical of war. Right? What kind of training is this? It's not athletic. It's military, isn't it? military. It's military training. It's army training. And how is it different? Army training, military training, trains its people to endure hardship, right? It tests them a lot more than through a fun sporting event. Yes, playing a game in a sport can be pretty tough sometimes. But fighting in a war is much tougher. And since fighting a war is part of their job description, then our guardians are going to need military training, not athletic training. Right? Make sense? So, we need to get them used to the conditions of war. And so, they're going to have to learn how to fight without having eaten in a couple of days, without water sometimes. They're going to have to fight in the extreme cold and the extreme heat, etc., right? Because war is filled with extremes. So, all right. And we're going to have to be very careful about their diet. They don't get to eat desserts and all these other things that people want. They don't get to sleep with prostitutes. We're told that, right? They have to be focused and tough, right? And so, this brings up the topic of, if you remember, one of the things that got added a lot to our second city back in Book 2, the luxurious city, was we needed more doctors, right? Why? Because our diet was not good anymore. It wasn't natural. It was not a healthy diet. And so we're going to need more doctors for all of these illnesses we're going to get because we're not eating right. Right? And what does Socrates call a doctor? A doctor is someone who judges a body with his soul or with his mind. right? And so we're going to need a lot more doctors, and they're going to have to be, and they're going to have to be familiar with all of the crazy diseases that people are going to get. Well, next to the doctor, though, Socrates talks about the judge in a court of law. Who is a judge? The judge is someone who uses his soul to judge other people's souls, right? He's looking at their moral qualities. He's trying to determine if they've committed a crime or not, right? And so a doctor uses his soul to judge bodies. A judge uses his soul to judge other souls. Now, unlike the doctor, though, do we want our judge to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of evil? That's a good question. Because the possibility is that being exposed to evil like that, especially when young, that will make that guardian turn evil, right? We don't want that. We don't want that. In addition, on page 93, Socrates talks about how, have you ever noticed that because truly good people are rather rare, much of the time they look pretty foolish. People like Socrates, maybe someone like Mother Teresa or any number of other moral heroes, the Buddha, who was a prince when he was a young man, right? And he got out of his temple or out of his mansion where he lived, right? And saw the real world and all the suffering, and so he left, right? But to a lot of people, that seems kind of foolish. Why would you do that? He had a great, wealthy life inside the walls of the palace that he lived in. Well, look at what Socrates says in the middle of 93. Since the one who has a good soul is good, the clever and suspicious person, on the other hand, who has committed many injustices himself and thinks of himself to be unscrupulous and wise, appears clever when he associates with those like himself because he is on his guard and looks to the models within himself. But when he meets with good people who are older, he is seen to be stupid, distrustful at the wrong time, and ignorant of what a healthy character is, since he has no model of this within himself. So, this is an interesting reversal of perspective. Normally, good people are around a lot of evil people, and as a result, they look kind of stupid and silly. But just reverse the perspective. Put the evil person in a room full of good people, and what do you see? It's different now, right? The evil person looks bad, as he should be, right? He should look that way. So Socrates is arguing here, we don't want judges, we don't want young guardians who are going to become judges to be exposed to lots of evil when they're young. That will corrupt their souls. They need to learn about it much later, and in a way where they don't take the evil into their souls, right? But they still nevertheless judge evil for what it really is. Okay? All right. Well, Socrates talks about we don't want our guardians to have too much physical training and not enough musical, or vice versa. Too much musical training and not enough physical training. This person is soft and gets easily irritated, this person becomes savage and angry all the time, right? So we need a balance here. We need a balance. So, well, who's going to wind up being our rulers? And how will we test them? The last pages of Book 3 talk about something known as the noble lie. See if you can still see this. Good. The noble lie. The noble lie. Remember back in Book 2 when Socrates said, the gods never lie? And yet now it seems like our just rulers are going to be allowed, maybe it may be even necessary, to tell a good lie for the sake of the city. That's kind of strange. What do you think about that? If the gods are not allowed to lie, why should our guardians be allowed to lie? Can a lie be useful and good? It's a good question. I'm not sure if Socrates wants us to just accept what he's saying here. I think he wants us to question it. Should the guardians lie? I don't know. But what is this lie about? Let's see here. Oh, I've got more room on this side. Okay. Well, the lie is about 3 classes in our city, correct? There are the guardians, who they are called the gold class, right? They're the highest and most honorable. And then there's the auxiliary class, the auxiliaries. That word simply means helper. Their job is to help the guardians. And then thirdly, the craftsmen. Everyone else who's making all of the stuff that the city needs and providing services that the city needs. The auxiliaries are silver and the craftsmen are bronze. Gold, silver, bronze. Well, Socrates says we need to tell this story to our city. We need to tell everyone that their origins are the earth. The earth is their mother, and everyone in the city has come from her. How would that be an advantage to say something like that? Sounds to me like it would in fact produce a good effect in the city, in that it would make everyone feel like a brother and a sister to everyone else, right? People are going to be willing to take care of each other more and take care of the land that they live on, right? The God, after all, has given it to them. Okay? So, well, so we're going to tell everyone that their souls are a kind of metal. There are gold souls, silver souls, and bronze souls. And depending on how you behave as a child and what you show interest in and aptitude in or ability, that's where you're going to wind up in these classes. Okay? If a child born to guardian parents shows a love of money, is he going to be able to be a guardian? No. He has to drop down to the craftsman class, right? And so finally we get to the I'm going to erase this here. Finally we get to what I call the 5 conditions for becoming a guardian. There are 5 conditions. I hope I could fit them on here. There are 5 conditions for becoming a guardian that anyone has to agree to if they're going to be allowed to become a guardian. Did you catch these in the book? This is towards the end of book 3. Toward the end of book 3. The first one is they do not receive a salary. No money is what this means. This is a dollar sign. They don't get any money. Remember when Socrates said that? The guardians get no money. Here they are in charge of the city, but they don't get any money. They don't get an income. Also, they are not allowed private property. They're not allowed private property. They have to share everything. They have to share everything. No private property and no private stashes of money. No wealth at all. Not in the usual sense, anyway. Moreover, did you catch this at the bottom of page 101? Guardians are not allowed to have privacy at all. They're not allowed to have privacy at all. And then finally, 4 and 5 deal with, I don't know about you, by the way, this no privacy rule. Wow, that's pretty amazing. But 4 and 5 are the things that the guardians do get. What do they get? They get room and board. Room and board. That's a phrase in English that means they get a place to live and their food is provided for them. They don't have to provide it for themselves. They don't have any money, but the city provides it for them. So they'll have plenty of food and they'll have a place to sleep. But no private property. They don't get to own furniture or anything like that. They don't get to own their own house. And what's the 5th one? Honor. Honor. They are the gold class after all, right? They're the highest class in the city. And so they receive the highest honors. But only as a group, not as individuals. Only as a group. They only get praised as a group and honored as a group. It's not allowed that one guardian gets to be honored and the other guardians do not get to be honored. So if someone comes up with a great law that helps the city, who gets thanked for that? The guardians together, all of them get thanked. Not just the person who came up with the law. So, to become a guardian in Socrates' city, you have to agree to these 5 conditions. Why no privacy, do you think? Why no privacy? That's the hardest one, I think. Don't you think so? That's the hardest one. I like having some privacy. Don't you? But the guardians don't get any. Why do you suppose they don't get any? When do people commit injustice and evil? Generally, they commit it not out in the open, but in secret, right? They generally commit injustice in secret when they are in a private moment, right? Privacy seems to be a necessary condition for committing evil and injustice. Isn't that interesting? And so Socrates is trying to take that away so that the guardians won't even be tempted. They won't even be tempted because they won't even be allowed to have privacy. And who gets to watch them, by the way? Just the other guardians? Nope. The craftsmen get to watch them too. That's what the text says. Bottom of 101 and to the top of 102. Oh, and by the way, who has to live this way too? The auxiliaries do. The auxiliaries have to live this way. Because they are the guardian's helpers. Okay? And so, now that you see the conditions for the guardians, do you think this city's going to work? Can the city work based on this noble lie at the end of Book 3? What do you think? Is this even possible? I don't know. The guardians and the auxiliaries have to follow these very strict rules, and the craftsmen don't have to. Yet, the guardians supposedly are the ones in charge. They supposedly have the power, but what don't they have? They don't have any money. They don't have any wealth. Normally, wealth and power are connected. Here they're separated. Isn't that interesting? So my question to you is, can this city work? Can this city work with this new organization, with these classes? What are the potential problems in our city now, do you think? Okay? So, that's Book 3. Again, realize Socrates is very concerned about the desires and the appetites that are brought to life, right? Because of the kinds of stories we tell, the kinds of music we listen to. He sees that most music and culture and storytelling is bad for the soul. It's bad for justice, right? And there's kind of an irony here in that the very people who most need the kinds of laws that Socrates is talking about are the people who are least likely to come up with them and least able to, right? Likewise, the people who are the most likely to come up with good laws are the ones who least need it. It's kind of an interesting irony in the text here. Okay? So, can this city work? Can this city work at the end of Book 3? That's going to be your assignment. I will also write this up, but and post it very soon. But that is your next assignment, is to read Book 3. If you haven't already, read Book 3. Watch this video, of course. Take good notes. And then try and answer the question in a page or two, can this city work at this point with this class society, gold, silver, bronze, where gold and silver have to obey these rules and the bronze do not. They get to live the way they want to. And yet, the guardians and the auxiliaries are the ones in charge. And can you tell how they're a little bit different? The guardians are the ones who make the laws, right? The auxiliaries are the ones who enforce the laws. They're like the police or the military. Okay? So, well, there's a lot more we could say here. We're coming up on 55 minutes, though, and I know we need to wrap things up. Let me know if you have any questions. And I'll be posting the lecture video for Book 4 very soon. We're just going to do Book 3, Book 4, and just a tiny bit, just a few opening pages of Book 7, and then we're done. Okay? All right, folks. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this is making sense. We're really getting into the deep nitty-gritty part of all of this. Socrates is trying to find what causes justice and injustice, right? And he's focusing a lot on culture, music, the stories we tell, the music we listen to, how we treat elders, just things of that sort. How rebellious of a culture are we versus how orderly are we as a culture? All right? Okay, thank you. Um, I will be posting another video. There are only going to be two more videos, one over book 4 and the other one over a few pages in book 7. So, all right. Thank you very much. Good luck. Bye.